great. Thank you. Sorry for being late. Well, perfect timing.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Sorry I'm late.
Oh, no, we haven't even started yet, so you're perfectly on time. Oh, this is Rachel's. Oh, okay.
Yeah, Rachel's one that told me how to get this. So.
Yeah. Thank goodness for that. Okay. So we can just go around the room and do introductions first. I'm Stephanie Cavino from the Blackstone Watershed Collaborative.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. I'm Darcy Young. I'm the Executive Director of the Narragansett Bay Estuary Program. First time coming to one of these meetings. Our organization has been involved for a while, but not participating in the meetings, but we appreciate the invite to start attending. So glad to be here.
Catherine Campbell, I'm the Beach Conservancy in the Rhode Island chapter.
John Moslin, Blackstone Watershed Council.
Hi, I'm Kaylee McLaren. I'm the Restoration Coordinator at the Blackstone Watershed.
I'm Mike Cassidy. I'm the City Executive Department Planning and Development.
Caitlin Chafee, I'm the Chief of the Narragansett Bay National Estuary Research Reserve. We are a division with DEM, and we've been helping somewhat with project management.
Eric Rickwood, I'm Superintendent of Blackstone River Valley National Historical Park.
Ron Mary Scholl, I'm a project coordinator with the Narragansett Bay Research Reserve.
Thanks. And online, Kevin?
Hi, everyone. Kevin Rice, Management and Program Analyst for Blackstone River Valley National Historical Park.
Thanks, Kevin. And Nils.
Hi, everyone. Nils Weberg with Fuss & O'Neill, working as a design consultant for TNC and writing.
Perfect. Thanks. So I think the big things for today, one, we wanted to welcome Darcy. We're so excited to have you here and participating. And Catherine's a new face for us too, sitting in for John. So
Yes, I've been on the team meetings, but it's nice to see people in person.
Yeah.
And, I will be reporting back to John.
great. Great. And Mike Cassidy is also kind of a new face, so we've met with you, but happy to see you here.
Yes, for joining us.
And we just did introductions, Rachel, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Rachel Holbert. I'm a project specialist with Narragansett Bay Research Reserve here at DEM. And we're really closely with Henry.
Perfect, thank you. So we've got a couple of quick follow-ups about NOAA and some other funding options, but I think a big chunk of our time for today is going to be talking about that Pawtucket redevelopment and the what's happening with that. So we'll start with NOAA funding follow-up. Do you want to?
Sure. There's not all that much to report. We do have a meeting with NOAA Fisheries on Friday, and that's to discuss the previous proposal and the review of that. So that we had talked about engaging with the NOAA Restoration Center with Danielle Perry and Jim Turek. I did reach out to them, and they wanted to wait until we had that meeting with NOAA Fisheries. So I'm out next week. We will likely be meeting with Danielle and Jim the week after. So hopefully we'll get some feedback on, you know, just kind of how the proposal was scored, why it wasn't funded. And then we had discussed some of the topics that we really want to bring up to Jim and Danielle, potential hydro buyouts, that kind of thing, and how the FERC licensing issues have played into the review of the proposal. So hopefully we'll have more to report after we have those meetings with Jim and Danielle.
Thanks. Any questions or anything else on that? And Bruce, do you want to introduce yourself? We just kicked off a minute ago, so you're not really late. If you can unmute yourself, Bruce Curlis is the executive director. Yes. Oh, great. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm back. I was laughing as I was seeing Callie and Steph texting Eric. Yeah, we're almost there. I've been locking the gate. Sorry, it took a minute. I was on another call, but my name is Bruce Curlis. I'm the executive director of the Blackstone River Watershed Council, Friends of the Blackstone, and also the Waterways Advocate for the Hasana Misko Nipmuc Band.
Thanks, Bruce. So next on the agenda was future funding options. So one was We talked about NIPWIP last time and how Rhode Island wasn't a part of that RFP and whether DEM had an opportunity yet or was going to talk to them about elevating the status of the Rhode Island projects.
Yeah, I think that's something we're definitely thinking about. I know that John and Jason had talked about too, like this general concept of an Narragansett Bay ecoregion. I think for the short term, it is gonna be important that we look at the individual funding opportunities and make sure, like, it's the NIFWIF, I think it's the Northeast Business Plan for that particular program. So we don't yet have anything scheduled to meet with them, but that is in the works. So I think that's kind of the next most immediate step. Anything broader than that, I think is to be determined. We still need to have conversations. That would obviously be a conversation with the estuary program as well. I do have emailed Dean Nolan Spears, the Narragansett Indian Tribe, to talk about, among other things, potential for a tribal funding proposal, but haven't connected with her yet. So hopefully that will happen. And then I don't want to jump ahead the agenda.
I wanted to take 1 second actually and go back to the ecoregion.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've had that conversation already. I haven't had it, but that's one that John O'Brien was bringing up of how do we get more resources and attention. You know, the Chesapeake Bay gets so much, they're funded, you have those numbers, I think, within your report, 8 times as much as we do per population or something like that. So how do we get that status here? And we kind of spitballed a bunch of different ideas about what that would mean, and we kept coming back to, well, gee, it's kind of the Narragansett Bay Estuary Program, but you're a federal program, so does that make sense? So it might be, I don't know if that's a topic for this advisory committee to have at another point, or that's, an NBDP conversation to have on the side and kind of just figure that out, maybe with John in particular. But I think it's an interesting question of getting different agencies involved.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, like Caitlin, like you said, following up with the individual agencies first, just to ask, what's up with us not being included. And I had a question, is it just Rhode Island, or does it include like the entire, like Mount Hope Bay and Massachusetts part of
In the Northeast Business Plan? I don't know.
Okay.
John, I know John did, a closer review of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's the reputation, it just excludes any areas in Rhode Island, like no.
We are conspicuous.
Okay.
Like literally Rhode Island.
Okay, yeah, I was wondering if it included any portion of Massachusetts or
It does, yeah.
It does, okay. So I want to take a look at that as well, because that's a big part of our region. But I think, you've talked about, and I've talked with John about, potentially the estuary program being able to convene partners to talk about that. So yeah, it's something we're interested in helping support in some way. And I don't, I'm not sure what the steps are, getting us further along that path, but I think the first step of just convening us all, getting maybe taking a look at, if there are other funding agencies that have similar plans, just to get a sense of where we sit, would be great.
Yeah, that would be, I think you guys would be instrumental in that conversation. And I did have a long conversation with Jason about it. And I know we had talked to John and Ryan about it at length. So mainly what we were talking about was there have been, there is this Southeast New England program, which includes, Southern Cape down through the Pawcatuck watershed. That is obviously an EPA-driven program. So some of the bigger questions is like, is there a federal agency that we would be approaching about this kind of establishment of an ecoregion? Which agency would that be? What are our objectives in that? I know that the SNEP, Southeast New England program effort was a long haul, and the TNC was instrumental in that. I mean, getting congressional support for that. So we want to be mindful of this may be a worthy endeavor, but we don't want to wait to try to reach out to individual agencies if it's going to help our funding chances on this project. So I think we kind of have to be doing both at the same time.
Yeah.
I think it's also important to identify, and we talked a little bit about this what SNAP is, if you look at what their strategic plan is, and then look at SNAP, how they function, because theoretically, it is EPA driven, but you have other agencies involved, and the way it functions day to day, I really feel like doesn't bring in those agencies. So does it make sense to kind of like rethink SNAP and sort of say, all right, well, these were our roots, maybe we can be more intentional about that, or does it make sense to do something else? So that's my biggest question, because I feel like if you go to our fellow representatives and say, we want this thing, they're gonna be like, we already did that, and it's
Right.
SNAP.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
I think we really need to have that conversation. Do we modify this? Do we make something new? Do we go to MVP, et cetera? So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. We don't wanna reinvent the wheel, but if things could be working in a way that is bringing those kind of restoration dollars to Narragansett Bay, we'll see if we can make those tweaks.
So does it make sense as a follow-up to have a separate meeting other than this advisory meeting to have that conversation about what does the ecoregion look like? Or do you want that as a topic of this meeting in the future?
I mean, I would kind of leave that to the group, but to me, this is a much larger conversation.
was
And again, I don't want to derail our very targeted efforts in getting this project implemented. So, you know, I think from DEM's perspective, we're fine if that's a separate but related conversation. But I would refer to the committee.
Anyone else?
Who else would you want to pull in to that conversation?
Yeah, so that's my instinct as well, is these members would be invited if they want to participate, but there would be other folks bringing in like Tom Ardito, for instance, or others from
Yeah, I think,
different federal agencies.
you know, one of my questions as I've been thinking about this is, yeah, do you want those kind of federal agency funding partners included in that first conversation? Or, you know, do we have a kind of a prior thing
A
going
small
on and
brainstorm.
then branch out from there? So I think that's something we can figure out collaboratively, you know, with just, you know, this group that we've been talking about initially, and then see what we want to do.
And most of the entities sit on your steering committee.
Yeah,
So,
that's true.
Again, you guys
That's-
would be a
Well,
great,
We could, you can see why we made you come.
Yeah.
We're throwing you into the deep end in
No,
the
it's
first
all good.
meeting.
I mean, we could bring that up in our September meeting, as, you know, something that we're thinking about.
or future, yeah.
Or a future meeting, I'm just, you know, as I mentioned, we're thinking of postponing our December, so it would be waiting until next year. So I don't wanna slow us down just because of my own personal timelines, so,
Maybe
you know.
if we have a chance to have that smaller
Yeah.
internal conversation
Sure.
before then.
Okay.
that's a possibility.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Great, I can look that as a need to do. So the last part of the future funding options was the MVP funding, if there's any update on timing or.
For the river connectivity hire.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, so our requests for our fiscal year 24 funding, which that is part of, are into EPA, so they're certain that we'll get, well, as certain they can be, that we'll get the money before our new fiscal year, which is October 1st. So it seems like we're on track to have the money in time, and so, you know, I think it's a good time to be chatting about you know, getting documents in place beforehand so that things can just kind of roll as smoothly as possible. So we've got, you know, a preliminary kind of sketch of what we were talking about that we put in our work plan.
Yeah, and just as a refresher, this would be a position broadly focused on river connectivity, but taking on some of this project management for the Blackstone in particular.
Anything else on that? I know you said you didn't want to get ahead of agenda, but I'm good now.
That was all I was gonna say on
Okay.
that, yeah.
We are caught up. Any other questions, comments, thoughts on other funding opportunities that people brought up or wanted to talk about? Or put on a future agenda? Okay. So the next part of our agenda is that Pawtucket easement, so I don't know, Mike, if you have any particular updates that you wanna
Well,
share with
actually,
us.
although we haven't been attending, we have been, I have been reading the minutes and keeping track of what's going on. And I see from last month, there was a significant amount of discussion about the redevelopment agency. For those who don't know, the Department of Planning and Redevelopment, we staff the Pawtucket Redevelopment Agency. I'm a planning consultant right now, but I have 50 years doing redevelopment agency work. Based upon my reading of the minutes, there appears to be a significant misunderstanding of the redevelopment agency's development proposal, what our interests are, and a significant amount of misinformation about what's going on with the redevelopment agency. We are not being uncooperative. We are not giving anybody a hard time. We are not mad at the National Park Service and we're not talking to them. That's not going on at all. We have a whole list of things from the last minutes. So I came today specifically in person to discuss and clear up some. So I was going to go by the comments from the last minute.
Sure.
Okay. The first one talked about needing to review. The redevelopment agency has a request for proposals out. We own about 13 acres. The former Apex, all of the parking lot, former Apex Tire Center, the little funeral home that was there, and we recently acquired the Broadway property owned by Old City Mill Association. That RFP is out for proposals right now. Okay, we'll see what we get. Are we going to get one developer? No. Are we going to get double proposals for all of the parcels that we have available to make up the area that we own? Probably not. I don't think somebody's going to come in and say, we want everything that we're going to do this. I think there may be multiple requests. Okay. There are 6 properties that the PRA has forfeit for redevelopment, including Broadway project. That is included in the RFP. Okay. Of those 6 properties, the Broadway property is least likely to get a proposal for that specific property. The reason I'm saying that is because certainly the Apex and the other are bigger parcels that can be done on them. I think the Apex Tire Center is a relatively small parcel, and I don't know if anybody's going to put a proposal to that. I don't, and we don't anticipate in our discussion with when we acquired the property from the Old City Mill Association, was that we were intending to use this property to build something on. That's not what that's not why it's included in the RFP. It's included in the RFP because if you looked at the RFP, you saw a potential development proposal. And part of that was changing the street. Right. That's one of the reasons we bought this parcel. We bought this parcel because the Slater Mill Association came to the redevelopment and said, you own everything else around us. We have no need for this property. National Park Service accepted all the other parcels the Slater Mill Association owned on Roosevelt Avenue. They were supposedly there's an agreement that Slater Mill is going to donate a dam to the National Park Service.
Actually, that agreement is now null and void thanks to the agreement between the city and the Slater Association.
But in any case, that's what we were told when they approached us about buying the property. I said, we're not in the business of owning property. It basically is a public park. So we're willing to sell it. We'd like you to buy it, which we did. Okay. We are in no way trying to prevent the Park Service from obtaining a title to the Slater dam. Okay. That's not our intention. That never was our intention. Okay. I'm going to go back to the RFP. The first thing you talked about, there might be restrictions or an easement on the property. There is no easement on that property. We've done a title run. We spent the better part of a year with discussions with National Park Service about their restriction or easement that they may have on the property. We went through all the title work they said.
Wait a second. There were no discussions. We spent 6 months requesting that the city talk to us. The city refused.
We
So let's set the record straight. The
Let's-
only thing we had to do was talk to the attorney. Now the attorney accuses us of lawyering up at a public meeting last month. The Park Service lawyered up. Lawyers talk to lawyers. It was not our choice to have the lawyers intervene. It was the redevelopment authority who said, talk to Tom Chen. We did that with our attorney.
Yeah, we had a meeting, would you, Eric, would you let me finish? There's significant amount of misinformation that you
Truth is
seem to
not
be.
something else, I'll let you finish, but I'm not gonna have you say to this group unimpeded that you've been cooperating with us and communicating with us. No, there was radio silence for 6 months, Mike. 6 months.
So let's make a list of all the points and
Let
then
me
we
finish
can,
here, okay?
yeah,
When we were in the process of acquiring the property, the National Park Service corresponded with us and said, we have an easement restriction on the property. We said, fine. Give us that information. Our title company didn't find anything, but we're not saying you don't. Show us. So they sent us 2 title reports that were done, I guess, when they were purchasing the Slater Mill. We looked at every single recorded document they gave us in the title search. Nothing we could find. And also, there's nothing that we found regarding the Broadway property we bought that they had any rights to the dam, that they owned any part of the dam, they had any water rights or anything like that. There's nothing that we found that says this Broadway property has anything associated with the dam. We asked the Park Service, I said, this, show us an easement. Show us what you got. We're perfectly willing to accept that. We had a meeting in April with their lawyers and with the Park Service staff. And we reiterated that and said, here's what's going on. We didn't find anything. We understand that you want some kind of access to get to the dam from the easterly side so that you can do whatever you need to do once you own it. That's fine with us. Either show us what you have and we'll include that in what we know about it, or tell us what you need and we'd be more than happy to talk to you about that. We had that meeting in April. That was our conversation. We got one email from, I think it's an attorney with Park Service, saying, what's going on with the property, we're waiting to get back from you. We said, that's not how we left it, but I'm gonna go back to that, okay? As far as the parcel is, it's out there with everything else, okay? There, right now is not any restrictions on the property, okay? We have, and we are in the process of putting in place a view shed easement on the property that will prevent any buildings being built in or sort of the middle of that block, where you can see from School Street, Slater Mill, Wilkinsonville. I've been out there with Lori Urso, we walked the site, we had it surveyed, I have that survey data. We have a draft of an easement that we're gonna provide to the Lori probably today. And the redevelopment agency at that next meeting will say, okay, here's the easement, here's the dimensions of it, here's where it is on the property. And also, this is what we propose to give as a view shed easement. But the Slater Mill Association take a look at.
so I just want to clarify that there are 2 different easements here that we're discussing. One is the view shed easement, which is important, and I'm not going to say it's not, but it's maybe not the focus of this meeting of Fish Passage. I think the concern with Fish Passage is more the easement for the
Right. So
building.
my point on that is, we're not adverse to providing some kind of easement. We're doing it right now. But we don't know what the Park Service needs, where that easement needs to be, how wide it's gonna be, what do they need it for, what do they need to say, what do they need to be allowed to do? And we have asked them that question. So, and we haven't had a response.
So again, I don't want to speak for either party here. I think that's a conversation that sounds like there's a lot more to talk about offline. But for this, and construction of Fish Passage, I think the concern was, what if a developer comes back and says, I have this beautiful proposal for that parcel? What is preventing the Pawtucket Redevelopment Agency from saying, you know what, you're right, that is a really great proposal. This is what we're gonna choose, you can build that there, and then this opportunity to build Fish Passage, which would require most of that parcel, what would happen?
As I said, we're gonna record the view shed easement within the next 30 days. And that view shed easement is gonna clearly identify that you can't build anything in the middle of this property.
Okay.
You can't put a building, you can't construct anything on it.
Okay.
And so that's sort of the answer to your question.
And when you said that will be provided to Lori, can you clarify who Lori is?
The Lori Urso is the Old Slate Mill Association. When we closed on the property, we signed a letter of agreement that said we would identify and provide a view shed easement that would protect the view of the Slater Mill and the Wilkerson Mill as you come into the city. As I said, Lori and I walked out there, we paced it all out. It took me a while to get a surveyor on the contract because they're very busy, but I finally got one and they've provided the survey details. So are we gonna get somebody who comes and says, I wanna build this 12-story hotel on the site? They won't be able to, because that restriction is gonna be recorded with the city. And it will be basically an easement on the property that will prevent any buildings from being built, basically in the most available piece of the property. Right, the rest of it is pretty well, there's a number of trees which came down, but still, a nice flat piece that sits there is this piece that we're gonna provide the view shed easement, okay? There was another question about whether DEM should submit a proposal for the Fish Passage on this property as part of this development, okay? We've had some internal discussions about that. We don't believe that that's necessary, and there are two things that will happen, or two things that the redevelopment agency will look at. If the DEM submits proposals that we'd like to have this property or develop this property for the Fish Passage, and here's what we want. When we look at development proposals, obviously capabilities, et cetera, two of the main questions we ask is, what's your financing? Where's the money coming from? And second question is, okay, what's your timeline to get this done? Okay. DEM, you guys don't have any money yet, which, you know, I'm disappointed with you guys that you didn't get that funding. Okay, we're not trying to prevent you from doing this. But if you do that and say, we don't have any money, we don't know how long it's gonna take us to do it, you're not gonna be very credible with the redevelopment agency.
Sure.
Okay?
And if I could just clarify, that was part of the meeting discussion, that did not come from DEM. It was,
Yeah.
I think folks were just trying to
Right.
understand what the options were
Right.
as far as, you know, how do we ensure that it can go. I had a clarifying question if I could ask, just about the view shed easement. If you remember when we all went out in the field,
Yep.
that was the easement we were talking about that started a bit below the dam and extended upstream
Yes.
on the property, correct?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
but like, as you say, flatter, more
No
developable.
matter where you stand right now, there's one spot that you can see all the way
That
through.
would
The
be
rest of it is all
Yeah.
treed and
slope.
so, well, it's not so slow, it's all, the view is blocked. And the property is not a very big parcel. It gets narrower and narrower as it gets to the dam. So it's not as it gets to Main Street Falls rather. So it's not a huge property that somebody's gonna come in and say, we wanna put this big hotel with parking on it. We've got Apex is 10 acres. That property doesn't look that big, but it's actually 10 acres. So, and then we just demoed the other building that's there, that's a pretty good site, I think it's 2 acres, that is. So there's nice, big, empty parcels to be redeveloped. As opposed to our discussions in-house was that once we get the development proposals in and look, and now we're talking about how we're going to use these properties, that's when we would recommend that you come in with the request of the redevelopment agency for consideration of, okay, you've got to develop the rest of this, we'd like to have some agreement that we can build the fish passage on your property, redevelopment property, and when and if. And they're not gonna be adverse to having that conversation. The only comment that Eric and I were arguing about is the discussions of what we asked of Park Service to provide us with. This is this is correspondence that we sent out about a month ago. This is what is going on. Park Service and the redevelopment agency and our discussions. Seen this already.
Take over.
You have one?
Oh, apologies online that you do not have a copy of this, but it's a letter from. it's from the
Timothy Chapman,
Massachusetts.
who's the redevelopment agency's attorney.
And it is to Jean Olson of the National Park Service, who's your attorney.
No,
Not
she's identified as an attorney. She is not an attorney.
Okay.
Nor has she ever claimed to be.
And who is Jean?
Gina Olson is the regional director for our lands office.
Okay,
She participated in the Zoom meeting we had in April.
okay,
And so we knew she was from DC, so we sent her,
She's not from DC.
well,
Okay.
whatever regional office. she was
Another factual error.
all right. And
in.
so,
We included everybody who was in the meeting. This was emailed out to everybody who was at that meeting.
and can you give us a quick overview for the folks online of what this letter says?
Basically, it says we had a meeting in April with the Park Service. They explained that they were hesitant or didn't say, I don't remember them saying they weren't going to acquire or have an interest in acquiring the Slater Mill Dam. We just asked them, okay, if you need to have some access to the dam from the easterly side, and you have an easement or something, give us a copy of that. If not, then come in and tell us what you need, what you're looking for. So we can have a conversation about where the easement might be on the property, what types of use you're gonna need, what access you intend to use it for. But we are not in the position to go to the National Park Service and say, here you go, we'll give you this piece of easement on this piece of property, when we don't understand what it is that they are looking for.
Excuse me, can I ask the relevancy between the Park Service looking to acquire the Slater Mill Dam and the DEM project of Fish Passage? I feel like that's two different things.
They are two different things, but there's been a lot of discussion at these meetings about how to deal with the redevelopment agency's reluctance to discuss the Park Service. The last meeting you had, there was a request to have DEM and PS make an appointment with the leadership of the redevelopment agency.
So to clarify, I don't know if that was, I think there was a conversation about leadership to leadership meeting between DEM and
Right.
NPS. I don't think that was necessarily with Pawtucket redevelopment.
No, that's not how I read it.
I think there was a need for a conversation with Pawtucket redevelopment, and I'm sorry that we lost Mills. But I had a question about who should be the right contact, right? Because currently, Fuss and O'Neill has a good relationship
Yeah.
with the redevelopment agency, and so it's been thought, okay, well, let's go through them because they have that existing relationship and that makes sense. But at the same time, if we're getting, maybe it's Brian talking to Nils, talking to John O'Brien, talking to Caitlin, there are a lot of opportunities for potential miscommunication there, totally unintentional, but it's like playing a game of telephone. So does it make sense to have another meeting where it's DEM leadership, and maybe I know that's already happened to some extent, having another conversation specifically about this easement? And I sort of have tried to understand the view shed saying, okay, well, we don't have an easement for the fish passage, but if there's a view shed if there's an easement for the view shed, that would sort of be a proxy and would prevent development on that site. So if that were to happen, that would be the sort of safeguard that this group is saying, oh shucks, what if there's this great development, what happens to our fish passage?
Right. And I wonder, there are two entirely separate pieces. One is the fish passage that you know about. The other is the discussions about the National Park Service and their conversations or the lack of the redevelopment.
Yeah, we don't want
So I
to
wanna
point
separate
fingers
that.
here
So
and we'll just do that.
I just wanted to, because of what I saw in the last minutes, I wanted you to understand where the redevelopment agency is in relation to that piece. Put that aside, absolutely. As I said, once we get the development proposals in, then DEM, either through Fuss and O'Neill or straight, however they want to do it, should then make an appointment to come into the redevelopment agency meeting and go over what you're looking for the fish passage. I've seen the plans, the redevelopment agency members have not.
Okay.
In the staff, we've been looking at this, we've been attending some of the meetings, or at least sitting in on some of the meetings via Zoom. So we understand kind of what you're looking for, whether you're looking specifically for an easement for it, a temporary construction easement as well, or whether you're looking for control of the property so you can work the fish passage in however you want to do. That will have to be a discussion between DEM and the redevelopment agency. But our recommendation is that don't do it as part of this development process. You wait until we get proposals in, which is September 15th, and we'll see what we get. We may go out again because we may not get proposals that we think are acceptable or are complete. We may have some parts we don't get proposals for. So once we get that done, then you can have a conversation with.
So clarifying,
Yeah.
when you get those proposals in, are you implying that DEM should be part of that conversation to determine which of those proposals move forward potentially?
No, I'm just
You
suggesting.
choose and then you have the conversation?
Once we have proposals in, then that's the time for DEM to come in and say, by the way,
But before they're
Here's-
chosen?
before anybody, it's gonna be months before we
Okay.
choose 6
And
months,
Go-
maybe
jump in, keep
more.
going.
But we'll have an idea of what people come in with. Are there gonna be proposals to reroute multiple streets that all jam together there and we have reputation of get lost in the tuck because it's all one-way streets. We're trying to eliminate as much of that as we can. The layout that was in the RFP, which is not anybody's proposal to develop it that way, made a pretty good layout in creating cul-de-sac and creating much more public development and parkland using the property we demoed and the Broadway property.
Well, I just wanted to add a little bit of clarification that may not have come out in the notes, and I know I was on Zoom last time, so it wasn't the best exchange, but that, DM and Fuss and O'Neill did meet with PRA.
Yeah.
There was that initial meeting with Bianca and some of her staff, and there was a second Zoom meeting. And, Fuss and O'Neill was at both of those meetings. We recognized that there was some concern that the Park Service was not involved in those meetings, and so that's on us, that perhaps there should have been more communication about what was discussed. I kind of relayed what was discussed in those meetings, and that, which is much of what you're saying now, that, the city's aware of the fish passage, that we'll discuss whatever easements are necessary. They have been, planning staff have been presented with the plans, they have copies of them. Nils went through a very detailed presentation of those. What we have now, which is largely conceptual, but in that second meeting. So, it was our feeling that this had all been discussed and that we were reassured that, it wasn't the city's intention to prevent the project from going forward. We have another issue of, which is I think why the leadership to leadership meeting was proposed between DEM and the Park Service, that, the Park Service needs to be part and parcel of those conversations. So if there are things we can do to improve that, and I believe you, Jason, met Eric, I'm not sure, but
We have not yet.
you haven't yet? Okay. Going forward, we can be better about being more inclusive in those conversations. But this information to me is very helpful because I think there was a lot of confusion about the process and at what point do we need to, you know, re-engage with the city and say, you know, here's where we're at. So it's helpful to know that there will be an opportunity. I think the, you know, I believe in the last meeting, it was like, well, this parcel's just in here, so anybody can propose anything for this, and it's like, well, that doesn't really represent what's been discussed, so.
That's why I think.
Yeah.
I did, but I do want to, I need to make sure that there's a very clear understanding. The city is not involved in and does not have any control or ownership of these parcels that are being offered redevelopment. The redevelopment agency is a separate independent agency. We purchase these properties. There are no federal funds, there are no state funds, there are no municipal funds involved in the acquisition of these properties. It's being done entirely with revenue the redevelopment agency has. And so we are no different than any other developer who's got property and offering it for reuse. The city will certainly participate with us in reviewing the proposals we get in. Our goal is to promote and develop things that help the city. That's what our role is. But they're two separate entities for the purposes of ownership and easements and use of the property. So it gets interchanged because we're the staff. When it's the staff of the redevelopment agency. So when you talk to the redevelopment agency staff, you talk to the city staff. So there's confusion here about how these entities actually operate and what their legal arrangements are.
We're pros at really complicated legal arrangements,
Yes.
organizations within organizations, we
Right.
got that.
Okay, so yeah, so so that I want people to understand that it's not the mayor who's and the city council that is in charge and responsible for this. It's the redevelopment agency with participation from, there'll be members of the council and there'll be members of the administration who sit on a committee that's going to review the development proposals. But the ultimate decision gets made by the redevelopment agency.
So I would feel more comfortable. I really appreciate you coming today and clarifying all this. And it is sort of in writing because, you know, we have our recordings, but I really feel comfortable if we were able to, whether it came from an individual or the state or whomever, honestly, to just submit that question officially to say, can you clarify what restrictions exist or will exist, are anticipated to exist on this parcel? So that is in writing for other developers to see if there was somebody out there who said, I really want to be right on the water and there's this opportunity that, you know, we don't want them to waste their time.
Well, there won't be any restrictions on recorded restrictions on the property before September 15th.
But we could say, are there any anticipated, when that still?
Yes, you can, and if you want to send a letter to Bianca and ask that question. And once the old Slater Mill Association agrees to that what we propose meets what they were expecting, then we will actually record that easement. It will become a public document. But I'd be more than happy to send that to you once we record it. And that restriction is probably going to be held by the city, probably, because the old Slater Mill Association isn't going to, they don't need to control it. We just need to have on record, nobody can build in this thing. So we're gonna give the easement to the city to hold, but the restrictions,
The ownership would transfer, the city would.
retain ownership would the city, yes, the city would retain the easement. The easement would exist. We sell the whole property
It runs.
to somebody else, that easement doesn't go away. That's as part of the title search by the developer, that easement will show up. We're gonna tell them, but that easement will show up on record that this is the view shed, this is an easement on this property, and here's what it says you cannot do. That's what this view shed. usually can or cannot. This, in our case, it will be cannot build anything in this window. And I'll be more than happy to provide a copy once it's recorded.
Thank you. So I've been dominating this conversation, but I wanted to make sure that others had opportunities to ask questions while we have
The question about the viewshed easement and the statements that were made during our site visit, talking about the viewshed easement going from Broadway, Main Street area over to the line of dam. And anything after that could be modified with the property line from the funeral home to allow for development.
Yes.
That's still considered.
Yeah, we don't know that that's gonna happen. My conversation was that this property abuts the, what was a funeral home, that property is available to develop. We've had some interest in restaurant use. They have a parking lot, they have the building, but the up view of the dam and Slade and all of that, it's from some windows out there, but they might like an outdoor space. And there's enough land at that end of the property that's not really a view to the mill and that, because of where the trees are, and then they have an L-shaped building, so they have a little open area, but not very much. So our conversation was, the only thing that he might, the redevelopment might do, if there's a development proposed for the funeral home that make it a restaurant, we might deed them 50 feet next to their property, so that they can have an outdoor area, which a lot of restaurants do now. Sometimes they run all winter as well, but that's
Right adjacent to that funeral home.
right next to the funeral home property, yes.
For the record, there are no restrictions to the between the funeral home property and the edge of the dam.
No.
Or they just passage has to do.
No, the fish, I've seen the plans, I don't think the fish passage is anywhere near the funeral home.
True, but the line goes to the dam. Between the funeral home and the dam, that's where I was some clarification. When we were on site, you had
Yeah.
said from the dam line to the edge of the property, the corner of Main and Broadway. Anything further, I guess that's north.
Yeah.
Is developable.
Potentially, yes. It's not a very large piece, but you take the view shed out. Is somebody gonna propose putting a building on there? They could, but my expectation is that the only potential development that might happen on that, the Broadway property, is an area directly adjacent to the property line with the funeral home and some small amount of area to be added to them to give them some open space, some park-like setting they can develop. But that's my conversation. There's been no proposals to, for that building yet. We won't know what, if any, proposal we get for that building. That may be one of the last parcels that gets approved first, but our expectations were that if developer came in for the rest of them, we might let them use the funeral home for site office. Wow, this is going to be a potentially multi-year development, just like Tide.
So I just put it on the screen here. I don't know if this is also what you're looking at your phone. So I stole the idea from Mary, I didn't come up with it myself.
Yeah, you see the funeral home building, you see the tree line, right, all the trees around it?
Here.
We're talking about that kind of piece of the property, where the trees are basically. And
So I believe that's just beyond where the exit, the Fishway exit.
I think it would be about here.
Right.
from what I've seen, yeah, it's just beyond the dam.
I can also pull that up. Sorry, I just stopped sharing too.
And that's why we're suggesting that once we get some development proposals in, NDEM come in and say, hey, we know you have proposals you're looking at, what to do this, here's what we would like to be able to do. We're not ready to do this yet, but we don't want to lose the opportunity to, because this is the what we think is the only doable way to create the fish patch around the 2 dams. And here's where we would anticipate that it's gonna go. And then we can look at any proposed development with that in hand.
I assume is there a negotiation phase with potential developer?
Yes,
Right.
yes, you're talking about, if we get proposals that we like, it'll take us 6 months to select somebody. And they've gotta do their due diligence, they've gotta do all the kinds of stuff they need to do, they gotta provide us with their financing. They have to, some committed financing before we enter what's called a development agreement. And then there will be basically clauses in it that if the developer doesn't perform, we get the property back. We don't deed it to them until they have everything in place, financing and all of that. And then there are some restrictions about performance and what happens if they don't perform. If they build half of what they said, then there's vacant land they haven't built on and they, whatever, we get the property, we take the property back. Offer.
So I'm sorry, the version I found is the very blurry version, but I think it gets the point across.
So it's just, and you can see where the building is.
So here in the trees.
Yep, and there's the tree line in there,
and there's
So-
the building.
so. And we might not, get what we give them for their use may not go all the way down to the river, the property line, at the river's edge. It
It would
might
be
be something related to where the end of their building is. Which is higher up.
Distance and-
Yeah, their property line is a lot shorter in depth from Broadway to the river than the property that we own. That's right next to them. There's a much longer run from Broadway to the actual riverbank. So we might need them what's related to their actual building footage.
Okay.
But that's a discussion we may or may not even have, depending on what we get for proposals for that. But
Can I ask a question that's
Sure.
pretty basic? With a view shed easement, that wouldn't preclude any development, it would just be development that would interfere with the view shed.
They
correct?
can't, basically, they can't build anything off the ground.
Right, but something like a parking lot or something could potentially, I know it's not necessarily the fit for the site, but I'm just saying.
Yeah, it could, but the redevelopment agency is gonna be one that say whether or not we would allow that.
Mhm.
Certainly in our discussions of the long-term use of this property, the redevelopment agency also is not in the business of moving parks. So once the development proposal, we see what roads we have to relocate, what we might do out there. Eventually, we're probably gonna deed this property to the city. We'll own the property and we'll own easement. So that's always been our long-term goal in our discussions of how we would use this piece of property. And as I told them when I was up, gave the tour, we bought the property, one, because the Slater Mill said, we don't want to own it anymore, we buy it. And two, because there may be some roadway improvements, we want to widen the street or whatever. Now we control all the property to the river, now we can play around with it a little more, we have a little more ability to we're not gonna move the street a huge amount of distance because we have all the utilities in the business. But we didn't have an identified new plan of how we might, but we kind of want to try and eliminate the funky intersections there and people going in one-way streets. We want to try to eliminate that. When I saw the site plans in the RFP, did a really nice job of how merging those together and having two-way streets everywhere and basically closed off from ocean, so the map that. The both, and again, this was only, we hired a company to tell us what kind of uses are out there, what are people doing, what's on the market, what are people looking for, and how would you lay out this property.
This map or the other map?
That map's fine. Basically, where what's shown on the proposal is these two streets end here and it go around into a cul-de-sac. And this becomes two-way instead of one. This is the parcel that we own. We might move this, but the proposal creates this whole area, the development parcel and a parkland area. So, but that's why, one of the reasons we bought the property, so we would then be able to have the ability to kind of do what we want to do in changing the street pattern out there. Make it work better.
So, a very good conversation. I know we are at time now. Yep, that happens quick. So the other things that were on our agenda that we will not go into are the revised fish passage. So 101. I don't know if there's anything to say about that.
Nope, I had sent it in the previous meeting, for folks to see. So just updates.
Do you want more feedback on it? Should we review it again?
Yeah, that was my intention, it's.
Yeah. Reminder for folks to do that. A quick reminder that the Blackstone Watershed Collaborative is actually transitioning to becoming a nonprofit, so we will still have our Zoom account. We just met with them yesterday, so we will still have it through September, but then it will transition. So sometime in September, we'll get a new Zoom account, we'll let you know what that is. I think that this meeting will be okay to be on the old one, what it is now.
We can always set one up too.
Okay. Yeah, if you want to switch it. To. And that our next meeting is September 19th. And will that be in room 300 again?
I think we're back to 300. Yes, I will confirm, but it should be on, let's see, I'll double check.
We had only said these two.
It was only, I
Sorry.
think it was only 2 dates that they had.
That's what I thought too. And then also just a reminder that, I think we maybe mentioned it before, but the cloud and John, Friends of Blackstone and other partners are working to have a public paddle again for Worcester Providence, so you're all welcome to attend that. It's gonna be, we'll be paddling from September 12th to 15th, but the 15th will be a public paddle, so folks can join the last 4 miles from Pawtucket to Providence. And then we'll have a celebration in Marion Brewing afterwards. It's welcome. So just getting that out there, but if folks have extra time and you wanna stay and chat, you're welcome to. I just wanna make sure we got that before. Ish. Are there other things that we wanted to bring up around this easement? So recap then. Currently there is not an easement, however, by September 15th,
Well, certainly before the end of September, we will,
before the end of September, there will be a new shed
Probably
easement that's reported.
well, at least should have it decided on whether
Okay,
I'm gonna actually physically record it.
Okay.
But once I physically record the easement, we're still in discussion with the Slater Mill, so we need to go through that process. I will make copies available.
so by the end of September, an easement will be determined. That is a view shed easement, which would preclude high development, but PRA intends for it to preclude also low development, such as parking lot or park. And that once we have that, it'll be provided. And that it still wouldn't hurt for us to ask this question about what are the anticipated easements, so that we have that on the record for any other developers. This is not City of Pawtucket, it's PRA, and that DEM should clarify exactly what they need of where the easement would be, construction laydown areas, et cetera, so that that can be considered, and that DEM will work with PRA once you receive your development proposals, which are anticipated in October.
Our development, the PRAs, they
To
do,
get back proposals by October, is that what it is?
they do back by September 15th.
September 15th, okay,
Proposal
thanks.
we have right there. And DM just needs to come in and say,
Yes.
this is what we want to, the laydown areas, things like that. Once the project happens, we will find a place. I'm doing a bikeway project now, right along Roosevelt Avenue. We took part of the city hall parking lot and used that for laydown areas. So we'll work something out.
Yeah, so we
Yeah.
will, we'll look to get something on the calendar with PRA after that proposal
Yeah.
deadline.
We meet the last Tuesday of every month, so the end of September.
And will that be part of a public meeting, and is that something that we should attend, or that's a separate conversation?
Generally, discussions of the use or sale of, it's not a sale, but a conveyance of rights, property transfer. Usually that's done in executive session. That's how generally what the rules are. That's why the next one of the categories is sale of property. And so, but certainly DEM will be sitting in the meeting, but it wouldn't be open to the public necessarily.
Anything else? One other question, actually. So when I met in person with when they had the site walk, Brian from Blackstone attended and I attended. They hadn't heard about Fish Passage at all, but I don't know who these two individuals were that were running that meeting. And we talked to them about it a bit.
Which meeting was this?
The site walk for the.
That I did?
The site walk on, what month is it?
Oh, okay,
August
okay,
6th.
okay, that, fine.
Fifth,
I
sixth.
didn't realize it was a second sidewalk. I don't know.
Yeah. For that RFP, there was a site walk.
Oh, yes, oh, that's right, oh, that sidewalk.
Yeah, so I
Yes.
don't know who those folks were that were running it, but they did not know about Fish Passage.
No, yeah, that's one of our senior planners.
Okay.
And one of our other, had access to he's a sort of property manager. He was there because he was gonna open up Manning Heifer. So, but they were specifically told it's a tour, they can walk around
Yeah.
and see the property, but you are not to answer any questions.
Yeah, so I just want to clarify though, at that conversation, Brian mentioned that there also may be a need for another easement, which I had not heard that before. And he said that the property, sorry, I should pull this up again. The lower property where the Fish Passage would enter below the dam.
Oh, yes, that's, okay, that's
He's-
part of the apex. Technically,
This property here. He
Yes.
wasn't sure whether the existing easement right of way would be enough for Fish Passage, or we would also need another easement there. And so I said, do you have the surveys? And he said, somewhere, we think maybe we'll check.
okay,
So
so that should be part of the conversation.
just to
Yeah.
make sure that that's
We
part of it.
also
been
own,
okay,
and
part of the
what you're talking about
conversation,
as far as the right of way, what I say is that there is a 50-foot right of way
Right,
from the apex property line, is basically where the parking lot is behind the building, to the river. And that's where the opening, the swale is, right? That's where
Yeah.
the, whatever it's called, I
Sorry.
forget. Where that is, and I see what they were saying, that you may need more than the 50-foot right of way. Based upon that, you should do,
okay.
but yes, so you should bring the plan in.
Just wanted that to be part of the
Whatever.
conversation
Yes.
as well, because I had not heard that before, or thought about it, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that especially that first conversation was actually kind of focused on that piece.
Okay.
So there's so much going on with the other projects as well.
And so who is gonna do that fussing and leaving? To identify the area there?
Yes, I mean, Fuss and O'Neill has given that information to the city in a
Oh,
way, and
The whole,
here,
for the piece, the apex piece.
I think so, yeah,
I wasn't part of that conversation, but I'll find out.
yeah, and we can also,
We have all the property surveyed.
right,
So we
right,
have
I
a
think there was supposed to
class
be an
one
exchange
survey.
of that
So just
information.
what we can
And I-
provide, if they haven't surveyed, if we can provide them
Okay.
class one
Yes,
survey for the
yeah.
property.
Do you know if that's happened, because
I don't,
Brian didn't know if that had happened.
I don't know.
I would love
It
to
was
have it.
definitely discussed that those class one surveys existed, and yeah.
Can I put that to you, Catherine, to follow up with Western O'Neill and find out if they have the surveys or not? 'Cause that's
Yeah.
It's a big question that's been asked for a couple months now.
Yeah, if they don't have the class one survey, it's actually, I think it's included in the RF, but I can send them, or I can have somebody send them a CAD file.
Okay.
But I need to know they, whether or not they asked for it and got it.
Right,
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not a big deal, have them,
thank you,
in my car, have them, well, they have download one, yeah, but I'll do my car.
thank you. And that way we can clarify.
Right,
where
although-
it's-
Way to get it. Yeah, it's basically, we put it out in RFP, so it's a public document. We make it available.
Sure, great, thank you.
Since these records are public, I would like to say on behalf of the National Park Service that we disagree with the assertions and statements made by the development agency. Given that there are certain legal issues involved, I'll let the lawyers speak to the lawyers and leave it at that.
Anything else that folks wanna? Any other updates that we haven't talked about?
Hope to have more for you after we have that conversation with them.
Well, thank you, everybody, for your patience of spending a bit more time together today. I do find that these meetings often run late. I know everyone has a tight schedule. Is this something that you would want these meetings to be an hour and a half instead of an hour? Is that helpful and then we're less rushing, or is it just, nope, let's try and be efficient? It's for anybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the meeting topics, but to me, it makes sense to block off a little more time, just so that, you know, we're being realistic.
It'd be okay giving back the time, so, yeah,
Right.
done, yeah.
Yep.
It's done.
So are you okay if we change our meeting invite to be 11:30 to 1?
Yeah, I can try to do
Is
that.
what?
Yeah.
I can do that.
All right, thank you.
That would be helpful.
That's the case we really should. Pizza.
I know,
That's
I've been
the-
one in a
that's the
long time to not.
What you have, slice of it,
Thank you.
there's only 3 misses. This is plenty of.
We'll take it.
I know. All right. Well, thank you, everybody online too. I hope you could hear everything okay, but we'll give you the notes. I'll try and be better about doing this quicker. Okay, cool. Have a great afternoon, everybody. Sorry you missed out on pizza, Kevin, Bruce.
I know. Have a good one, everyone.
Thank you.
John already told me he's bringing some back for me, so.
Oh, perfect. Here's that. See you, Bruce.